And welcome to the One More Thing podcast. Today I'm joined with Dr. Troy Doucet and Mr. Brett Watson. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us. Good to be here.
You guys did a great job this weekend. I love when you guys are in dialogue. You balance each other very well. This week we talked about truth and in correlation to like promises and like I love the whole like that's a good motto as far as like under promise over deliver. I think that's just a good way to live your life. Yeah, but there's a Jordan Peterson quote that kind of reminded me, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this. If we lived in truth, if we spoke the truth, then we could walk with God once again and respect ourselves and others and the world. Then we might treat ourselves like people we care for. We might strive to set the world straight. Thoughts on that quote?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that comes to mind with that is being honest with yourself, being aware of yourself enough to know that you have value, right? It seems like a lot of people in our culture really struggle. I'm one of them.
Right.
Really struggle with understanding that truth. So when we talked about your student, James, I thought I'm preaching to myself, but I think I said at one point, I said, we're all A people.
Yeah.
You did. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that comes to mind.
Yeah. I love that quote, man. It just reminds me, I just posted something on my Instagram and Facebook that I'm reluctant these days to call myself a Christian because of the connotations and baggage that come along with that sort of situate Christianity within a realm of fundamentalism and exclusivism, and et cetera.
Amen, brother.
But there is a reality, right? When that's how we kind of spoke about truth, that truth exists in this sort of this realm of the real, but yet there's a paradox that is always going to be consistent and constant, right? On one hand, we have the reality of a world which we live in and experience, but then there's also this reality of a world that is hoped and longed for.
Right.
And that goes back to both of those can exist within that tension of truth, right? That your situation may not be what you want it to be, but as Brett said, like finding value in oneself can give sort of that impetus, right? That launch pad towards what we hope and long for, even though it may not, constitute itself in what we live and experience now. But I think both of those have a value of truth, right? And not only should we appropriate that to ourselves, but to others. And I think that's that tension of living in the truth, not seeing someone based upon the external factors of what we see and experience, but based upon what God might be doing internally that is unseen and unnoticed, right? And that was what I saw in James back at Dallas College. There was something inside of this kid that was not being experienced or lived, but something that I knew was hoped and longed for. And you have to call that into being, right? It's not a ridiculous notion of, hey, James, you're going to be a multi-millionaire, dude. No, right. None of that sort of crap. It was just like, use this moment to live within the truth of who you are. And I think that brings us closer to what God is, and right, and what God's initial desire was for this entire thing of creation and stuff. So,
well, I think also too, just to kind of point out like the whole value aspect. Say you asked me like, hey Ricardo, could you help me move on Thursday? And you asked me to my face. Out of my desire to want to be liked and to show like I'm a good friend, I'll be like, yeah, no problem, I'll help you move. And the morning of, you text me like, hey, we're meeting at noon, and there's like this disconnect.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, actually, you know what? I can't make it. There's like that. There's almost like this like knee jerk wanting to be liked. Like this is me wanting to be a good friend.
Right.
So I'm gonna tell you this on this day.
Yeah.
But then once we disconnect from face to face, there's almost like this disconnection of responsibility
Yep.
since I'm not face to face with you
That's
anymore,
right.
that I could just like, oh, actually, you know what? I can't make it today. Something else came up.
Yeah.
So I think there is like that. It's not just about telling the truth or making a promise in the moment, but it's that follow through that can be the most difficult part for certain people.
That's right.
So one of the things that you said in the talk this weekend was, and it really got me thinking, like, how do we wrestle with the fact, just to kind of change a little deviation there, but how do we wrestle with the fact that Christians die at the same rate of cancer as atheists, Muslims, Buddhists, etc.? This is a paradigm shifting fact for people that don't necessarily know this or believe very strongly, like, if I get cancer and I just get enough people to pray for me, that I get the prayer warriors united, that I will be healed from this.
Yeah, that's why it was said with a little bit of fear and trepidation.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. I'm sure it made a couple people uncomfortable. I mean, it was a paradigm shifting fact. I remember when you had first said that on a podcast. Like,
we wrestled with that in the preparation, because when I brought it up to Brett in our sermon prep, you know, I said, look, dude, I know this fits, you know, and it's illuminating the truth of what we're trying to convey. And I said, and I was going to pull it out, and Brett was like, no, leave it in. And I think it's something that needs to be said within the context of what we're trying to develop, but still give that element of hope, you know? So.
Right. And I think that's one of the biggest things when you're talking about this idea of truth. And I love when this happens, when I have questions in the middle of your sermon or your discussion, and you answer the question later on within the discussion.
Yeah.
And when you guys started talking about the tension of truth, and you told the Zit story about Esther,
Yeah.
you know, it reminded me. You guys seen the movie Liar Liar?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so
yeah.
that's what came to mind immediately. So this idea of tension of truth in the movie, if you don't, I'll set up the premise real quick. If you haven't seen the movie Liar Liar, it's with Jim Carrey. It's a hysterical movie. And so in the beginning of the movie, he is a pathological liar. He lies about everything. And at a certain point, his son makes a birthday wish saying that, I wish my dad could never tell a lie. His dad doesn't show up to his birthday party. And his dad promised he was going to be there. And he wishes, like, I wish my dad could never tell a lie. Jim Carrey wakes up the next morning unable to tell a lie.
That's right. Yeah.
And so the whole movie is hilarious because of all of these things that happen. He gets pulled over and the officer asks him why he's speeding, and he goes through all these different reasons, and he completely gets himself into massive amounts of trouble. And he's a lawyer too,
That's right.
ironically enough. But there's a point where he's sitting down with his son, and he's basically like begging him, like, please take back this wish. Like, this is ruining my life. And he starts to explain to his son, like, when your mom was pregnant with you, she would ask me, do I look big? And he's like, you know, obviously she looked big, but I'm not going to tell her that. I'm going to tell her, no, honey, you're beautiful. You're glowing, you know, and this whole tension of truth is like, was he lying? No, he wasn't lying. He was telling her the truth that she needed to hear, because I'm sure in that moment he believed that. I know with my wife, I did. Like, yes, you're bigger than you've ever been, but you're beautiful to me. You're glowing. You have this, like, you're becoming a mother. And I think that's a really amazing thing. So there is this, like, tension of truth. And that quote that you said, I believe it
From
was Voltaire,
yeah.
everything you say should be true, but not everything true should be said.
That's right.
And I think that's a really important aspect of truth. And so my question is, how do we balance this whole idea of truth and not completely giving up hope or killing someone's hope? And I think your story at the end was beautiful about that.
Yeah.
And that was the question that I'm like, man, how do we wrestle with this tension of like being honest, but also not killing hope? And the thing that came to mind was, say, you know, one of your parents gets pancreatic cancer, and you're just like, you know, the stats.
Yeah.
And when you talk to your parent, you're not your dad's like, you know, I'm going to beat this. You're not going to sit there and be like, well, actually, Dad, your likelihood of beating this is going to be pretty low.
We have a good story from McLaren's book that you're working on.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. You know, in the class we're doing McLaren's book, and he has a story about this guy that a young man that cornered him after a conference that he spoke at, and just said, "Hey, I wanted to thank you. Your books really helped me when I was in a certain stage of my faith development, but I stopped reading you." And he said, "Really, why?" And I said, "Well, I stopped reading you when I found out that my precious daughter had cancer. And so where I'm at right now, I don't need to read things that stir up questions in my mind. I need the assurance of my," he even referred to it as stage 1 development, where things were all very certain, and that her health depended upon my prayers and my faithfulness, and that somehow that's what makes the difference. So that's the story.
Yeah, and see, for me with that story, that a father moving from these advancing stages of disenchantment with this fundamentalist idea of truth in Western Christianity, for me, it's not a regression back to a simplistic state of just like, God said it, I believe it, that settles it.
Right.
But it's a progression towards a hopeful reality. Because again, I don't think he's betraying any notions of truth at all by being hopeful. I think he is manifesting what it means to be human.
Right.
And that is to hold on to something that is bigger and greater than cancer itself, bigger and greater than our pain and suffering. And that is the hope against all hope, man.
Yeah.
And that's what I see in that story.
Yeah, no, I see that too. I would argue that he could take a better approach to that, but
yeah. But that's
because what
he,
happens when
that's
he,
what he knows to be,
right?
That brings him comfort.
And he's, he clearly wasn't a dumb guy. He's gonna come to some realizations along the way. But what happens, when you pray and with all the faith in the world, and your daughter still gets sick and sicker, and maybe even dies, then you got a whole new crisis to deal with, right? But I think that this whole thing revolves well around what Paul had to say about truth, in that he coupled it in Ephesians with love. We speak the truth in love. If you are conscientious about that, then you're much more likely to communicate truth the way that Voltaire is hinting at,
Right. Well, and I think a really important aspect of that whole idea of speaking truth in love is an actual relationship with the individual, that you are speaking truth in love, because they would know, like, I'm a loving person.
Yeah.
So, like, to give an example, how many times have you heard the story of the little old lady at the church that tries to comfort somebody that, say, they just had a spouse that died, and they're just like, maybe this is just some unresolved sin that you have in your life. And I'm just speaking truth in love,
Yeah.
It's like, no, you're not.
No.
Like, this is heinous what you just said.
Yep.
So it's like, I think there has to be like, there's solid relationship, uncoupled from terrible theology, obviously, but also this understanding of like, I know you're coming to me in love.
Yep.
Whenever you speak the truth, as hard as it is to hear.
Yeah. Even untenable theology is often, unacceptable, even when relationships are built on love and
for
family.
Sure.
It's you have to respond in love, right? And it's sort of like this, I don't know what to call it, but like truth triumphs, man, when it's done in love. Truth in any other paradigm is simply truth for the sake of vanity. It's truth for the sake of being right, as we said, instead of right being. And there's a distinction there to be made. It's not about being right. It's about right being, right? It's not about, what do we say in the sermon? It's not about believing the right things that we think are true in order to be saved from something. No, we are saved to something, for something. And that is for transformation when I serve and when I give and when I'm able to speak truth in love. And that's for me is what the purpose of church and community is for, man.
Agreed.
It's not to center ourselves around these doctrines or creeds that are, again, are untenable or, valid to only an exclusive few.
Or demand nothing from you.
Yeah. Like,
So many of the creeds that we meaning the church at large, impose upon members, you'll notice that they require nothing of you.
Yeah.
You have to believe in the Trinity. Okay. What do you have to do for that?
Right.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They're all centered around things that don't require anything of you.
Yeah.
So how true is that from the pragmatic sense, right?
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, was there anything that you guys had to cut out due to your limited time for your discussion?
Oh, geez. Yeah.
A lot. Anything of important note?
No, I think there was more of a, I don't want to call it like a reductionist summarization, but like those, I'd encourage people to go back and watch the sermon again and really dig into those three sort of theories of truth that exist, in philosophical ideas, pragmatic coherence and the correspondence theory, and see where they find themselves. It's kind of like McLaren's stages. Like you find yourself in certain paradigms of truth and what works for me. I only believe this because it's linked to other things I hold.
Right.
Or does what I believe really correspond to what is real? And so, that's for religion, that's for politics, that's for anything, man. So,
Yeah.
Well, it's all about right being, like you said.
yeah.
And I guess if there was one thing that I would have added, going back to the story about the daughter with cancer or the stats about cancer, look, if as a Christ follower, I'm not really bought into the notion that I should be a truth seeker. I should be in touch. I should be contemplative enough about my life that I'm in touch with reality in an increasing way, then something's missing, right? So the stats are what they are.
Yep.
Reality is what it is.
Yeah.
So better to be a person that pursues the truth and learns to love in it.
Yep.
Beautifully said. All right. Well, thank you guys. We're going to be in the last week of Game of Thrones.
Yep.
And then we've got a new series coming that we're all really excited about. So thank you guys so much for being on One More Thing.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks.